Okay. All right. So what we're going to do today is last week we had talked about Napoleon, and not that he personally was a great Jew lover, but the ironic thing is, and then he called these various assemblies and the Sanhedrin, that he turned to discuss, whether the Jews had already been granted equal rights in France, but he wanted to pursue it further. Should they be entitled to all the rights? Obviously we were very different, especially those Jews from Alsace-Lorraine, the Ashkenazim, because by their dress, their speech, they were speaking Yiddish, they were not speaking French. So should they? Are they really part and parcel of native Frenchmen, even though they might have been living there hundreds of years, which many were. But this idea of granting rights, so as Napoleon started his campaign to conquer the rest of Europe, so the ideas of the French Revolution came with and appealed to the people. And many Jews in many of those countries that he entered were then also as if the French government were, endowing them also with equal rights. Of course, after he was defeated, you'll see, things went back to how they had been. But now the idea has been implanted in the minds of the people. The Jews, for sure, now are going to clamor, for these equal rights, and there are also the governments of these various countries. Now this is a possibility. Rights had been granted, nothing terrible happened. Even though they have now revoked them temporarily, but ultimately, as we get into the mid 19th century, some countries or later on, but the rights will be granted to Jews everywhere. I'm trying to imagine the euphoria, throughout Europe, among the Jews. Oh, gee, they're now finally recognized are human beings. We are just, like other people. We are, uh, equal rights to be given to everybody, regardless of one's religion. Obviously, the diehard, like aristocratic, people in countries are still opposed to it. But the idea, that this is now by law, right, that Jews are entitled to this. And really, kolakado to here in the United States, because we were founded on the principles, of equal rights to man, and that's incorporated in our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and in fact, the colonies by and large were founded on that principle, that we treat everybody equal. I mean, some colonies better than others, but but the idea was there, and they were actually based on European philosophers and their writings, such as John Locke, who's British. But this idea is now finally like reverting to Europe, for where these ideas came from. So last week, of course, we talked about France. We talked about the fact that Jews settled in several areas. Alsace-Lorraine goes, the medieval times before. Jews had been living there for a very, very long time. Although, as you remember, unfortunately, for the Crusades, many of those communities were many of the Jews were massacred. But they still stayed on. So, even though officially in 1394, that's when the Jews were expelled from France, they all come trickling back, and nobody seems to object to their presence. And after 1492, we're going to get Sephardic Jews who will be moving into the southern part of France, the southwestern part of France, and then it's mostly Bordeaux and Bayonne. And then there will be some Jews, not in large number, there will be Jews living also in Paris. And those were probably the Sephardic Jews, more so than Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews were always sort of set apart. Part of it, as I say, by their dress and their language, and that's the reason.
So why the mother?
uh, because they felt compelled. They had to show their loyalty to Russia. How did they know? Was Napoleon going to be successful? They know he was not. So those are the Jews of Eastern Europe, because they feared, which did happen, that this was going to lead to assimilation, and then, or the kind of people would just, and we'll see as we go into our study of the reform movement, you'll understand, what was, this general fear about it. So what we're going to do today, so we're leaving France now. They already, they all have their rights, not that, look, how deep did this feeling of granting rights to Jews go? I mean, what happens to the Dreyfus case? At the end of the 19th century, and this venom and anti-Semitism all came, to the fore, and this man was falsely accused. But again, because of all this anti-Jewish feeling, calling him death to the Jews, as he's marched to the streets of Paris. I mean, so now it wasn't just against this one man who they spied, which is, as I say, untrue. But well, we're all, but look what's happening now, right? With Israel and Gaza. Any case, so we're going to. So I guess I wanted you to have your map, so you can just see. Well, there are two. As unfortunately, titles. There's, let's look. Well, just it was a general. It's called The Emancipation of European Jewry. It goes from 1789, which was the French Revolution, to 1918, which is World War. I know it's not on there. There are two maps. You have two maps. Okay, so it's going to be this map. I don't know if you can see. Okay, this is the one I just wanted you to look at, which is going to show the various dates of emancipation granted to the Jews. Of course, in France will be the earliest, and then it's going to spread. But look at England. I mean, even England doesn't look. They first grant Jews the right to be elected to Parliament, because they didn't have to take their oath on a Christian Bible. That was 1858. So this is way after the French Revolution. So even in a place so-called liberal as England, they weren't granting equal rights to all Jews. I mean, they were living freely, comfortably, practicing their religion. Nobody, was coming against them. But, there were definitely took a while for the idea, that all Jews, regardless of their background, should be treated as equal citizens. But this idea, right, this granting of rights to all people, especially to Jews, now that's going to spread eventually. Look, Holland is in there, 1796, which is interesting, because Jews have been living in Holland for a few centuries already, and they were it was a very liberal country as far as, I mean, they could practice their religion totally freely there, but I guess officially on the books, it was not till Napoleon started entering these various countries. So whatever rights had been granted as a result of the French Revolution, this is what Napoleon was bringing with him as he entered these other European countries. Belgium, look, it's 1830. As later we go into Germany, we're going to discuss Germany in greater detail now, and eventually we'll get to Austria-Hungary. So those are things we're going to concentrate. I'm not talking about Russia whatsoever right now. It's a whole separate unit. It's Eastern European, and as you know, the fiasco that Napoleon had when he tried to conquer Russia, and they couldn't deal with those terrible winters there, as happened to Hitler. Okay. And then there's just this other map. I want to sort of need them in conjunction. They're slightly different maps, but some of them have more cities mentioned that I'm going to be referring to. So that's why you might this one, which again was lopped off, it's called Napoleon and the Jews. And it also just shows the various campaigns and the countries entered. All right. But there are cities there in Germany that I'm going to be referring to. So that's why I wanted you to have that map handy. Okay. So let's begin the sheets, that we have. One entitled The Jews of Germany and Austria-Hungary, early 19th century. By the way, I looked up information about Austria-Hungary. It officially was not called, right, Austria-Hungary until 1867. But already, let me see, it's already in 1718. All the territories of the Hungarian kingdom were at that point ceded from the Ottoman, right? At that point, it was initially under the Ottoman Empire, and was ceded to the Habsburgs. But I guess the official joining of the two countries is not till 1867. But people already associated the two countries as into one rule, but officially it won't be, until 1867. So let's see what happens as Napoleon enters these countries and what changes are going to occur. Okay, so first start. Okay, so in the German states, we finished Napoleon. All right. In the German states, the hopes of the Jews for emancipation during the era of the French Revolution and of the depended on a number of factors. Okay, so are they willing truly to give, equal rights to Jews in Germany? Now, we talk about Germany, and Germany is divided up into many provinces. So we'll see how that's going to affect the emancipation of the Jews, depending where you live in Germany. So what would have determined whether the Jews were accepted, as equal? So the economic conditions and the opportunities of each state and the degree of liberalism to be found among its rulers. So it depended very heavily on economics and also the position, that the ruler of each province would have had to Jews. But of more importance was the proximity of the state to France. The closer you were to that French border, the more likely you were to grant equal rights to the Jews, who lived among them. So we're going to start with the first one. So the nearby kingdoms, you can see it on that map. It says the kingdoms of Baden, and Westphalia, Westphalia, if I pronounce it right, because I don't say the W, granted the Jews complete equality. Look at that, because they're very, very close to France. The map is not 100% accurate, I feel, to what they look like on a European map, but this is from Martin Gilbert's book of historical maps. Look at the city of Cologne. Now, Cologne, this is a very ancient medieval Jewish community, which suffered quite a lot again during the Crusaders, from which Jews had been expelled several centuries before. But now they're going to be readmitted. Okay, let's invite those Jews back. So again, there could have been economic reasons. And again, it could have been depending who was head of the city of Cologne at that point, the burghers, the business people, what was their attitude, and if they were pro and accepting the Jews. Okay, so it became part and parcel. So again, we're talking about this is sort of like the northwestern part of France, of Germany, Lubeck and Bremen, which are a bit further away from France and from French influence. They permitted the Jews to settle within their borders. And up until now, officially, they could not live there, unless again you're extremely wealthy and you got special permission. And this was due again more to enlarge commercial opportunities, okay, because they knew the Jews would aid in the economic development of the province. So they said, okay, we'll allow them back and give them rights. But had nothing to do with the fact that, you're such a Jew, with open arms, blah, blah. This is interesting. How about the city of Frankfurt am Main, which was a major German town in the Jewish community, it was a very, very famous medieval ghetto. And after much haggling, all right, big discussion, look, even in France, you know, bastion so-called of liberalism, they also are going to debate, should we allow the Jews here, give them rights? So the patrician, that would have been like the wealthier class, rulers of the city, freed the Jews from much of those old restrictions, and they made them pay an enormous sum of money for this granting of ordinary human rights. It all boils down to, they accuse us, of our economic practices, but they're imposing this upon us. They're making this into some ugly monetary transaction. But one general gain was the abolition by 1810. Okay, so Napoleon, first enters early 1800s, of the degrading discriminatory taxes which the Jews had to pay in German-speaking countries. Right. So apparently this tax that was directed solely at the Jews because we were Jews, this has been now abrogated. That you don't have to pay, that. Of course, you're going to tax us now for citizens, we're going to be taxed like anybody else, and I'm sure they found ways, to have some sort of special taxes upon. Let's talk about Prussia now. Prussia is more to the east. Right? The course of emancipation in the Kingdom of Prussia was of the utmost importance. Prussia was the largest, the most powerful of the German provinces. Right? Now, again, they're not going to become a united country of Germany until much later under Bismarck. But, we're talking about a time, right? But that's much later. Okay. I say Prussia. You say Prussia? Okay. All right. Well, here in America, it's we call it Prussia, right? Okay, so during that last decade of the 18th century, that means around the 1790s, the King of Prussia debated with his advisor that the desirability, should we grant the Jews some measure of freedom? All right, so the ideas are really like circulating. And a commission was appointed and in due time reported back that the Jews were not yet worthy of the honor of Prussian citizenship. Few to them. The Jews were still considered to be outlandish in religion, because regular citizens, they're German, all right? They are Christians. And occupation, again, we were restricted in our occupation. Whatever, we weren't considered solid, German stock. And again, Jews have been living in Germany again for hundreds of years. But they through their community organization, that they would have they were like a state within the Prussians, so as if we were separating ourselves, which we were never accepted. So of course we founded our own relief organization, representation, whatever. But they're using this now as an excuse. They're so standoffish. They're having even their own organization. They are not really part of Germany. The commission failed to indicate how the Jews could transform themselves as long as they were burdened with onerous restrictions and laws. You've imposed all these things upon us. So now how do you expect us, to instantaneously, totally change how we're earning our living and how we are conducting, our lives? But in the course of the next decade, a few minor restrictions were gradually removed. So in the year 1812, finally, Prussia, after Prussia had been already defeated, and when Napoleon had come in and already defeated Prussia, remember he was on his way to Russia, and when it needed every ounce of energy to prepare for its war of liberation from France, right, to start the counter-revolution, the Jews were granted partial emancipation because they wanted the Jews to think it's probably wanted money, to help, support their campaigns. Their armies. Civil disabilities were removed, and Jews could be elected to city council. Ah, they still could not hold any state office. So again, relegated to more minor positions within local governments, but never part of the overall government of Prussia itself. Right. But you see a little bit granting of rights to Jews, in these countries, and or it's more, I think, the acceptance of the idea that yes, that Jews can be treated equally with all other citizens and should be granted as a result equal rights with everybody else. But there's these are very strongly Christian countries, so it's ingrained, to them, unfortunately, to be Semitic. And well, today, I, it depends. Germany was half and half. The more northern part is Protestant because it goes more in Luther. But the southern part, the part closer to Italy, is Catholic. And Bavaria, for example, Bavaria is southeastern Germany, and they are Catholic, very strongly Catholic. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And neither the Catholics nor the Protestants like one another either. Yeah. But they certainly did not like the Pope. We are always, held in blame. So now the next part have it titled Austria-Hungary. I told you, really, it does not become Austria-Hungary officially until 1867. But there is already an alliance between Hungary, right, and Austria. The Empire of Austria-Hungary not only adopted no measures towards emancipating. Now, this is a very Catholic, these are Catholic, countries. So they are very much opposed in unity against the Jews. But they even took some steps back. So not only are they opposed to the idea of the granting of rights, right, as Napoleon is trying to bring with them as he's going eastward, but now they're going to impose, even more hardships. The rulers from the emperor down persuaded themselves that Napoleon, I don't think persuaded themselves, partial of their way of thinking, that Napoleon's friendly words and his revival of the Sanhedrin, this is what they were concerned about, would have the effect of attracting the Jews of Austria and Hungary to France. Well, even though they didn't like the Jews, but they did like, the economic benefits, that the Jews have. Remember, like with those Oppenheimers, those very wealthy Jews had to be welcomed into Vienna. They still, and there's still laws in place, that Jews cannot live in Austria. So now the police redoubled their watchfulness lest the Jews turn to revolution. We're always caught in this bind, when you talk about European politics, are we aligned? Are we aligned with the right, or are we aligned more with the left? And of course, naturally, we are always accused of everything, no matter what. So when I say the left, I mean a turn to liberalism, a turn to the idea of what it should be granted rights. And I say more to the right, these are the bankers, these are the wealthy people. They're standoff, they're setting themselves apart, from the rest of the regular citizens. So now, perhaps you're going to study this in 1850. I don't have to what it is, 1850. There is, it's titled here, Betrayal at Vienna. There's going to be a Congress called the Congress. And they're naturally among their various things. Now, Napoleon has been defeated. He's defeated in 1815. Starts in 1814, 1815, sure. After Napoleon's defeat, the European states, large and small, sent representatives to a Congress in Vienna. What should we do now with Europe? Reconstruct the map of Europe, see what each country might grab for himself. So it reminds me, even after World War II, remember when we met, I don't remember what's the name of that? no, but in the 1918, 1919, they gathered, I think they gathered in France, to decide what? No, 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 no. No, after World War One is Versailles. No, there was something oh my God, I have to look up my history again. But they also debated, which parts of the world would go to which country. You know, that's how like Palestine ended up in British hands. Yeah, right. Uh, no, 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 this happened in Europe. This was a big conference in Europe. And it's eluding me, but I'll look it up and I'll tell you. Yeah, Gent. No, I mean there might have been, but this is not the one I'm talking about. To be continued. I'll look it up and I'll tell you. Any case, here we are, 1850. In any case, 100 years prior to after World War II. Oh, you're right. It's post World War One. You're right. It's after World War One where they had this big conference to divide up, all the various countries that had been, ruled over by a gap with Austria, Hungary, and Germany. They were defeated, and now the Allied powers are deciding what to do, both within Europe, and even in Europe, how they're going to divide everything. Okay, so now it's 1815. Napoleon has been defeated, and with him, so many of his ideas of revolution that he had brought with him. And they meet in Vienna. With few exceptions, the princes and princesses, the soldiers and brewers, hope to reestablish the old pre-revolutionary order. They're going to be called reactionary people who want to bring back that old way of conducting, the political life, the social order, within their countries. And of course, naturally, one of the major things we're going to be discussing, the Jews. They always felt like, the granting of rights to Jews was sort of like shoved down their needed Frenchmen, right? And they want to change things. No, now I'm not talking about. I'm talking about 1815 at the Congress of Vienna. Congress of Vienna. The Prussian representatives were willing enough to let the Jews enjoy the slight gains they had made toward emancipation. All right, so already in Prussia, a little bit of movement, now to the granting of rights. That yes, they recognize that, that it's okay. It's not going to harm the country. If anything, it could benefit, their particular province, and so they're allowing, the Jews, or to remain and to become treated equally. That's about Austria. Austria and the smaller states, however, especially those which have been occupied by the French, saw in the freedom of the Jews the most provoking reminder of the revolution. Because here they had been defeated by French forces, and they, ultimately there's this horrible hatred. This still exists on some level, I don't know, between the French and the Germans, and they're always constantly fighting back and forth, over territory, especially the western part of Germany. So the idea of granting rights to Jews, well, that smacks of Napoleon, those terrible Frenchmen. So they didn't want to have any part and parcel of that. They only wish to eradicate any memory of these liberal ideas. One of the prominent Austrian diplomats even claimed the Jews had been responsible for Napoleon. And haven't we see this down to this very day, how we are accused ourselves of, when those towers fell in Manhattan, and the people, some people believe that actually it was the Jews who had orchestrated it. Oh my God, and then so many Jews have actually lost their lives. Whatever, just a sick mind. What can I tell you? So every once in a while, the question of the Jews would come up before these delegates at this Congress of Vienna. But before long, the reactionary tendency in the discussions became clear. They want to bring things back. You really can't. You can't hold back. Once there's change in the air, but they're making this attempt in 1815. Let's just report the how things were before 1790, before the French, or 1789, before the French Revolution, before Napoleon, and those fancified French ideas. We don't want any part of it. We want to go back to just the way we were before. Several Jews, so now you're going to see how the Jews get involved with this Congress and with this discussion. Several Jewish communities recognize the danger to their few hard-won rights, and they sent unofficial, they're not officially invited, like Napoleon had invited them. Originally, the notables had invited them, and Napoleon then had invited them, and Von Hedrick. They're not even invited to be officially foreign marshal, of this Congress, but they sent unofficial delegates of their own. There were Jews, of course, there always are some non-Jews, right, who tried to exert pressure against a return to the old medieval conditions. But the influence of these lobbyists proved to be totally ineffective. On the other hand, another type of Jewish effort proved to be more influential. Vienna boasted a number of very wealthy Jewish homes, such as those of the financiers Nathan von Ornstein and Bernhard von Essen, to which invitations were eagerly sought. In other words, they had these very gorgeous homes, and they would hold various parlor meetings and gatherings, and a lot of non-Jews, they wanted to be invited to gatherings. The foremost intellectuals and statesmen used to gather there, especially eager to engage in discussion with the charming and highly cultured women in these households. Like, forget the guys, they wanted to have conversations with the women. Again, very well educated, I'm sure. They were dressed magnificently or whatever. The visitors, however, get a load of this. This is so. They enjoyed Jewish hospitality in the afternoon, tea. But then when they got together in the evening, they voted against Jewish. It was perfectly all right to hobnob with these very wealthy Jews and enjoy their hospitality, but when it came to granting them equal rights, forget it, right? Their attitude towards Jews was still based on prejudice. It's so totally ingrained, unfortunately, in people, and on a desire to keep them in inferior position. You might think you're so high and mighty, you're so wealthy, blah, blah, blah. Look down upon you. You're not proper Germans. The committee in charge of the Jewish question eventually brought in a resolution on the subject of the Jews. Its original wording permitted the Jews to continue to enjoy the rights already granted to them. But a slight change was made in one word, so that on closer analysis, the resolution said exactly the opposite. It limited the Jews to the continuance of the rights granted by the various governments in existence at the moment of voting. So, depending on who was in charge, 1815, 1816, and that determined the decision of the Jews within the government. Of course, by that time, they are already reactionary governments, and are opposed to the admittance of Jews into social grouping. Since rights had been granted to the Jews by former governments who had been under revolutionary influence, and the existing government, right, 1815, post-1815, could withdraw every shred of emancipation acquired by the Jews during the previous 25 years. I don't know, it was 25 years. They're probably thinking, from whom I got some of this information, is thinking from 1789 to so about 10 years there, and then 15 years in the 19th century. But really, their rights only came with Napoleon, and we're talking about 3 to 6. So, yeah. Thus, it was proved once more that reaction in politics and economics brought with it reaction to the treatment of the Jews. The great states of Europe, after the Congress of Vienna, organized themselves for the purpose of keeping their own populations in subjection. So underlying this, also this anti-Semitic attitude, is this fear that the general population will rise up against these governments and overthrow them and really set up liberal governments, right? And that and then they would lord it over, the smaller states. The three major powers at this Congress are Russia, Austria, and Prussia. And I haven't discussed Russia with you, what's happening to the Jews in Russia, because it's a whole separate unit. And they formed what was called a holy alliance. And they used every unholy means to uproot the slightest suspicion of liberalism. In numerous anti-Jewish pamphlets and articles, and in statements by the reactionary governments, it was asserted that Christian society could not grant equality or economic opportunity to the Jews. So all these efforts, I would say that over that, let's say the past 10 to 15 years, it came to naught. Everything was overturned, I think, reactionary. Many of the smallest states of Germany now went back on their promises to the Jews, even though more to the west, who were closer to France. Some places into which the Jews had been but recently admitted expelled them again. And I'm not really delving into it in great detail here, but for example, like when they entered parts of Italy, they freed the Jews from the ghettos, stuck back in the ghettos again. So it's not just these countries, it's affecting many other countries. And the Europe's middle class had tasted freedom. And wait a minute. Oh no, I'm so sorry. All right, Frankfurt. The two Frankfurt major. The city of Frankfurt, which had accepted cash payment for the granting of limited. I remember they made them pay there. They kept the money, but not its promise. Okay, gee, thanks for all this huge sum of money you gave us so we can grant you freedom. Hey, we're not getting any of the freedom, but you're not getting your money back either. Throughout the lands where German was spoken, a derisive cry greeted the Jews. Hep, hep. It was a cry from medieval times, which we call the darkest moments of the Middle Ages. When they would go out, campaign for destruction and the Jewish communities and murder in the village, they would say hep, hep. I'm not sure what hep, hep comes from, but this cry, sometimes accompanied by violence, indicated that the work of the revolution in freeing the human mind from prejudice would have to be done all over again. It's like all these gains had been accomplished in let's say about 12-year period. I'm not talking about France. We'll do France separately, but yeah, everything is turned topsy-turvy and that. But you can't 100 eradicate the changes people have in your minds. Yeah, and again, there's always some liberal elements speaking out so forcefully, but this idea that everybody, regardless of your religion, should be granted rights. It's there, although it's not in practice at all. The old order, nevertheless, could not be reestablished as thoroughly as the reactionaries had desired. Europe's middle class, obviously the upper classes, they're very fine, happy to go back to our way we always conducted. But the middle class had tasted freedom, and sooner or later they would demand it again. So again, remember, we always talk about the revolutionary spirit among peasants, workers. It's coming from more of either the some members of the upper class or the middle class, and they're instigating them to revolt. But it's not coming, so much from the peasants themselves. So above, right, so they would demand for, granting of rights again. Above all, reaction could not be reestablished in France. Forget it in France. I mean, this idea of trying to say, that's so much imposed. You can bring back, but forget it. The idea of equal rights. We're not. They would not the memory of the revolution was too strong there. The middle class would not be denied new opportunities, while the Jews there were deprived of absolute equality, which they thought they had gained in 1791. They were not treated anything like the dignity Jews suffered in German lands or in the territory of the restored provinces of the Papal States in Rome. Right, John? I mean, we'll have to do these, they're all separate units, but the Jews had been allowed to live outside the ghettos. I told you, and now of course don't have to go right back there. The example of these countries gradually affected the rest of the European continent. Right, so it spread the ideas, spread eastward, actually, right? And spurred the Jews of Germany to ask for and work for the equality which was their human right. So they're not going to give up yet fight on this among the Jews of Germany. But for this is so. Did everybody get this? So now they started preparing work on the reform movement. Well, how did it? Right. Okay. So let me read this now. Okay. Oh. Okay. Okay. Now, unfortunately, well, we don't have that much time left, so I think we'll work out okay. This is the only one. Yeah, whatever, it's fine. Frozen. Yeah, no, the mat's on both sides. We only need one sheet of the mats. I'm taking it for Rose. Ah, okay, fine. I unfortunately was in the hospital this week. I visiting. Yeah, did you see my hand? No. My blood count quite a bit. Very weak. My blood count. We still don't know why, but meanwhile, so I got 2 blood transfusions. Yeah. And then they gave me some extra iron, to kind of build me up. So I didn't have time but it's all right. We don't have so much time left. So, whatever I prepared will be sufficient, for today. All right. I had not been feeling well for several days. Even when I came here last Thursday, going 100%. And yes, it was. But I couldn't seem to. I'm a kind of person, I'm extremely neat. And usually I right away do the laundry, we make the beds. I did do the laundry. So. But I couldn't get around to remaking the beds. I know, I just felt yeah, exactly. And then Friday night we were invited out for dinner. Somebody nearby. I mean, not far at all. But on the way, I remember I walked very slowly going there, and on the way back, I said, I shopped at least 4 times. Because I was obviously because my blood count was so low, I wasn't getting sufficient oxygen. I mean, I didn't understand. So, yeah. So then my oldest son, he's around south of Michigan, came for the conference held actually at BRS. And he came Sunday night and said, I gotta go to the hospital. So we actually called Hudson. And the guy there, I don't know what his name is. There were at least 6 guys showed up, but there was one who obviously was more in charge, and he picked it up right away. He said, your blood count is extremely low, and that's why you're feeling. I thought it was my heart. I didn't understand what was wrong with me. Yeah. So, I was finally admitted, but I still don't know what's causing, so now I got more investigations. Holiday also be healthy. So we'll just read the very beginning, here of this about this reform. So let's just visualize though in our minds what was it like for now these Jews in Germany. Napoleon had come in, the ideas of the revolution had not been circulating in Germany for a while, and they had been granted, depending where you in Germany, some degree or some measure of equal rights. Now it's trying to be taken back from them. Oh, no, they're not happy with it. But how are they going to ingratiate themselves among the German population and the people in charge with the idea we are just like you? So let's see how, yes. So that's why the reform movement. Okay, For a full generation after the French Revolution, the Jews of Europe, so you should think of it, again, generations considered like 25 years, so that would be today. The Jews of Europe were giving various explanations why full emancipation could not be granted. You're not like us. We're not going to totally accept you, putting you down. And they took these reasons very seriously, the Jews themselves, and did all they could to make the adjustments required of them. I mean, to me, it's like insulting, but this is how they felt. They wanted these rights so much, right? As a result, they often sacrificed their dignity as in order to attain the distinction of being accepted as citizens. They didn't recognize that the pretentious arguments of their opponents were little more than excuses for prejudice and envy. I mean, I guess on some level they did understand that, but they wanted so much to be accepted as German. I mean, yucky Jews. To this day, they look back upon their lives in Germany, very favorably, I don't know with those people, but yeah, I'm not saying all Yankees like that, but there definitely are former Jews who think this way about themselves and their relationship to Germany. I mean, they're always praising who free Germany is and whatever. Eventually, the struggle resulted indirectly in considerable good. So it revived interest now among the Jews into the nature and history of Judaism and of its people. And in fact, the study of the discipline of studying the history of the Jews comes from Germany. It'll be a little later date, later in the 19th century. Heinrich Ratz, I don't know if you ever heard of him, he was the foremost historian. And he wrote a monumental work, A History of the Jews, which my father did put down myself. I no longer have it in my house, but it's 6-volume work. And the idea studying Jewish life, more like as a study, not necessarily to be lived that way, how it was in the past. They're seeing it more as evolving of Judaism, of Jewry. And in society generally, it brought greater cooperation between the Jews and the forces of honest liberals. So remember, we talked already about Mendelssohn. He had a very fond relationship with certain individuals, non-Jews in Germany, and now they want to foster this even further, going into their contemporary times in the future. This enlisted added strength in the struggle for the rights of man and for greater freedom. Throughout the 19th century, the struggle for adjustment and emancipation continued apace. So we'll see what will happen later on with some other revolutions that are going to take place. But we're still, let's say we're now in the 1820s, or even up until 1830. While Mendelssohn had advised adding general culture to the Jewish sphere of life, remember that was it with his schools. That's why first he wanted the Jews to know and speak and read and write in German, so that they would become more important parcel of the German people in general. He felt this was the way to be accepted as full Germans. But then he felt that, like certain secular studies could be added to the Jewish curriculum. He found that he had this. His followers had found little time and sympathy for what they perceived as the narrow confines of the Jewish faith. So what happened, though, which is obviously why well, we would call it Orthodox Jews, but the traditional Jewish leaders, they were appalled by this, because what happened was, of course, nowadays our day schools do combine the two disciplines, but in those days it's going to lead those Jews who were adopting it to leave the Jewish fold, to change themselves entirely to be as German. But being totally German meant that's the problem. They accepted every criticism of Judaism. I mean, really, it was really self-denigrating, putting down your own background. Yeah. They made no effort to acquire an appreciation of its virtues. They fell easy prey to the ridicule of Judaism. How about those liberal Jewish people here? They're participating in some of those, you know, gatherings against Israel and pro-Gaza. What's with these people? You know, even in the United States, those a lot of those protests, they're Jews involved in them. You didn't even know that? Yes, it's bad. It's sick. It's sick that you should, have that attitude. All right. So they fell prey to this ridicule of Judaism current among the Christians with whom they associated. They soon began to chafe under the restraints of Jewish life. We don't want to follow all these ancient laws and rules, They're from, the ancient past. Some years after Mendelssohn's death, and this we had discussed what we discussed, Mendelssohn, some of his own children and grandchildren became converts to Christianity. And this is what's going to happen. I see it's already, a little past the time. So I think, well, let's just finish the one more paragraph and then we can. Ignorance of Jewish teaching was only one cause for this abandonment of Judaism. Another cause was the failure of society to even consider recognizing the Jews as equals among them. I mean, here these people, they're so excited about the fact that they, are now going to be considered citizens. Oh my God, this is being taken away from them, and they're so upset. Following the Congress of Vienna, the liberals among the Christians gradually lost their influence. So even the few people who had backed them, they're, everybody's reverting back to this very strong reactionary movement. The result was a terrific blow to the hopes of the upper class, physically, spiritually, economically, residing outside the ghetto. They were told that their very Jewishness constituted a ghetto. For just being a Jew, you're trying to separate yourselves from those Jews who live in the ghetto. No. You're still a Jew, so it's you are living in a ghetto. Consequently, politically, and to some extent socially, a Christian state must keep them within that ghetto. You can't become just like us, you're too different. A wave of conversions, therefore, set in. Many members of the wealthy Jewish families flocked to the churches and baptized. Such Jews had lost the spiritual stamina which had kept the Jewish group alive through many darker ages. So we never had this people that people convert. I mean, there always are some, obviously, but not that it's such a large, would leave the Jewish fold. So never, very sad. We'll continue. Will lead though to the reform movement. I'll explain next week. All right. Be well, everybody. Take care. How am I? Yeah. I just have to find out what's wrong with me.